Welcome back to video 9 in the series with some footage of Sydney and a trip I did in the last year I owned the boat out to New Caledonia and Vanuatu. Spent a lot of time north of Brisbane, up on the Queensland coast. But in the summertime when it got hot, I used to head south down the New South Wales coast down to Sydney. It's quite different from the trip up north. Up north you've got all the islands. On the way south I used to duck into the rivers, sleep the night in the boat. There's so many dolphins on the way south down the New South Wales coast. Some nights I've struck bioluminescence in the water where everything goes green. And when there's dolphins in the water, you get a fantastic display of green-lit dolphins. During the day I used to head out offshore, try and pick up the East Australian current. It's a river of southbound running water. Gets up to about 3 knots in places. When you find it, it's like stepping onto a conveyor belt. You can see it on the GPS, sweeping you south. It's quite an impressive entrance into the Sydney harbour, with the cliffs either side of the opening. And you can see the buildings and the Sydney Tower for miles out to sea. I must have caught an unusually quiet day when I took these photos. It's usually a pretty busy harbour, Sydney Harbour. It's pretty cool sailing past the icons of Sydney. I used to head under the bridge, about the third bay on the right. Balls Head Bay was my home when I was down there. It was a quiet spot in the bay here, with trees around you. Sometimes you forget you're even in Sydney. I just had to walk up the hill. I could catch the train into town. It mightn't have looked super slick on board in those days, but it was functional and everything worked well. The bunks in the forward cabins were both king size, and lying in your bunk you could look up through the hatch above your head at the stars at night. The plastic hatch at the foot of my bed was a Dorado vent. Got its air from the chain locker. Because the boat was at anchor all the time, it was always facing the wind. I kept the chain locker propped open, so there was always a good through flow of air, irregardless if it was raining or spray, whether you're at anchor or whether you're at sea. Probably 95% of the time I lived on the boat, it was at anchor. I used to get my water from the taps on the shore, in the park or wherever. So trips ashore with a dinghy full of plastic containers was a regular occurrence. Back in Brisbane, after registering the boat as an Australian ship instead of a Queensland boat, changing the home port from Noosa to Brisbane, I was ready to head off on my first foreign voyage. As part of the preparation for the trip, I rigged Spectra lines next to the shrouds, just in case the shroud failed. There was 2 of us on this trip. My partner Sarah and myself got our passports stamped and cleared customs in the Brisbane customs office the night before, with 24 hours to leave Australia. And the next morning, after a grand farewell from friends and family, the marina in Brisbane, we set sail for Noumea, 800 nautical miles east-northeast of Brisbane. The weather started off really good, but by nightfall on the first day, the wind had really started to pick up. The coastline of Australia was long out of sight, and the night was black. There was no shipping traffic around. There's not a light to be seen. We got hammered for 3 days. Sarah was seasick for pretty well the whole trip. On this trip, the effort setting up the autopilot really paid off. It became my best friend. For the ocean passages, I was basically a solo sailor, but I could rely on it steering the boat while I did the other things, including getting my head down every now and again for a few hours sleep. After 3 days of heavy weather in the middle of our 8-day voyage, the wind dropped off to nothing. We drifted for 2 days and never saw a soul. It was beautiful. We could open everything up, air out the bedding, and enjoy a moonlit dinner out in the cockpit as if we were at anchor. Felt pretty high tech on this trip, with a borrowed laptop
with charting software hooked up to a handheld GPS I bought as a standby. After 3 more days of heavy weather and 8 days at sea, the sunrise brought with it the view of New Caledonia. We were greeted with a welcoming bonjour on the VHF when we arrived and given directions to the customs clearance dock, the marina in the Mia. After tying up and going through the customs formalities, it was so nice to step ashore and enjoy a hot shower and a cold beer. After a couple of nights in the marina, we sailed around to Ile de Pin with turquoise water and then discovered the Bay de Prony. Spent about 5 days anchored here alone, catching up on sleep and enjoying this tranquil place. After another week of exploring around the Mia, we departed New Caledonia for Vanuatu. I can remember lying on my back on the couch on the bridge deck on the night we sailed up to Port Vila. It was all dark except for the glow of the instrument lights. We were charging along at 13 knots, and I thought how simple it is with this basket of wood that I'd glued together and some cheap electronics. Here we were crossing an ocean while this craft was navigating itself and keeping a watch out for vessels. We had a good run from the Mia to Port Vila, a 330 nautical mile league we did in 25 hours, which gave us a speed of about 13 knots on average. It wasn't quick enough to keep up with the Pacific Sky, but he wasn't that far ahead of us when we arrived up there. The barbecue smelled pretty good though when he was going past. Vanuatu was beautiful. It's made up of over 80 islands. The photos I took don't do it justice, but the water here is fantastic for snorkeling and diving. It was like something out of a movie. The people are literally getting around in grass skirts, living in thatched roof huts. When I came into anchor off an island, it was respectful to go in and meet the chief and get his permission to anchor in front of his village. This was a social event. It usually involved sharing a half coconut or two of kava with the chief and a little tour of the village. The locals came out in their dugout canoes to barter. If I had known, I would have brought a hell of a lot more UHT milk, etc. You could exchange things that were pretty ordinary to us for some beautiful seafood out here. They were lovely people. After 3 months of adventure in this beautiful place, we fueled up for the return trip back to Brisbane. I've run out of time again on this video to fit in all I was trying to cover. I'll follow this with one more video to complete this series, showing how the interior looked after I finished off the interior fit out, and some photos of how the boat looks today. Thanks for watching.